And that's, how do we find healthy relationships? And we're talking about all types of relationships, not just the romantic kind, because we do need help finding romantic partners, but we also need help finding healthy friends. So how do we find a healthy friend? We also need help finding healthy associates at work, and in our life in general. We also need help cutting off unhealthy people, such as those who are family members by blood, but they're actually toxic to us energy wise. And so we need to know, how can we determine if someone's really healthy, if they're a safe person for us to develop a relationship with. And along those same lines, how should we show up to a relationship? So before we get into this discussion, we want to reflect a little bit on what the diagnosis of CPTSD is, because this diagnosis is actually shared with prisoners of war. So you can imagine someone who's behind enemy lines and they get captured by an enemy nation, and they're held in captivity for years on end. And their captors have a goal, not just of dominating them physically, but breaking them down mentally. They try to get prisoners of war to defect to the other side. That is, to change their alliance or change their allegiance. They try to get prisoners of war to recognize the sovereignty of the enemy nation. They try to get prisoners of war to give up information. They want to actually compromise POWs at the most basic level. And so as a result of all of the torture and the mental abuse and the emotional abuse, for instance, torturers will use tactics like making the prisoner of war think that they're about to escape, but then trying to pressure the prisoner of war into a confession that they truly committed a crime that they may never have committed. And so after years of being held in that captivity and the toll it takes on their mind and all of the things they've had to do to survive and all the things they've had to say to survive, they may return back to their hometown, if they survive it, as someone who has complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And that is the diagnosis that they share with those of us who had an emotionally abusive parent or two. At the core of the trauma of CPTSD is the fundamental loss of one's belief system, the loss of their values, the loss of themselves. The people who are in control, the captors, in this case, the parents, actually have the child for a whole 20 years. And they are indoctrinating the child with propaganda. And they're trying to get the child to confess to crimes that the child has not actually committed, such as being responsible for the parents' faults and flaws. These predatory, narcissistic parents want their children to believe that any atrocity, any abuse that they experience at their hands is actually the child's fault. And so they want the child to be programmed to no longer view themselves in a positive light as they were naturally born to view themselves, but to actually let that go. When the child does so, in order to have the love and have the support of the parent, this is to the child's detriment, because the child needs a strong ego in order to survive in the real world. But right now, the child is adapting to survive as a prisoner of war in their own house. The child's captors are deliberately trying to get the child to accept a shame-based identity. It's all your fault. This is done for a reason. This will allow the captors to better control the child, to better manipulate the child. And so if they can convince the child that everything that happens is the child's fault, even the problems in their marriage is the child's fault, And the child will have that shame-based identity. I am the problem. And the spotlight will no longer be on the actual captors, the abusers, the neglecting, emotionally immature parents. So the child's emotional defense system, of course, screams out in pain. And so they experience anxiety, they detach, they go through depression, and all of that violation of themselves, of their values, makes them feel a sense of inner torture. So they start running from their own emotions. And all of that, the fear and the anxiety that they're feeling, they start to fear the fear and the anxiety itself because it's so painful. Their system is being absolutely demolished, flooded with cortisol and adrenaline at poisonous levels. And so they begin to fear their own heart. And they feel like, I don't even want to be alone with myself, which makes them increasingly dependent on being with others. But since others are dangerous, then they need to manage other people's emotions and make sure everybody's happy. So they become those people pleasers and those high achievers. And then they have to be around their mom and dad to feel whole and to feel complete. Since they don't rely on themselves for their self-esteem, they need someone else to reflect back to them that they are valuable, that they are worthwhile. But being around mom and dad is dangerous. And so they become emotional managers, and they're hyper vigilant at all times to any change in mood. Just a little slight change in a facial expression could mean that mom's about to lose her temper or dad's about to get violent. And of course, although they fail to be able to see who is really to blame, they put all of that pressure on their own shoulders. And time again, they fail at keeping their mom happy. They fail at keeping their dad happy. And when they fail at that, they blame themselves. And every day is a repeated pattern of walking on eggshells and working hard to please and delay the next blow up. And in this state, a child cannot develop a clear sense of their own values, of morals, and of justice. And that's just how the captors want the child. So that whatever atrocity or whatever abuse they heap upon the child will actually accept that as being their own fault. Child still has their empathy. They would never want to see anyone else be unfairly punished, but they're numb to the idea that they themselves are being punished and they themselves are being tortured. They feel like they can cope with a lot. In fact, they feel like they're deserving of the worst. And so as adults, these survivors will continue to isolate themselves to feel safe. But with isolation comes depression and desperation for connection. But with connection comes further pain and scariness that the person's going to become too much for them and actually harm them the way their closest caregivers treated them. So as you can see, this start in life sets a complex trauma survivor up for difficult relationships at best. It's not uncommon for me to be talking to a survivor, and the survivor, I say, do you have a goal of potentially meeting someone? They're like, no. Like, oh, you don't even want to potentially find some? No, I don't do relationships. Not at all. No. Why? It comes down to a deep-seated fear. You see, there's nothing wrong with choosing to be single or even choosing to be a loner if you prefer not to have any relationships. But you want that to be due to your personal preference. You want to make your choices based on your dreams and your goals, your visions for the future, and based on love for yourself and love for others. You don't want your decisions to be rooted in fear. And so for trauma survivors, their decision to not have a relationship sometimes is rooted in that fear that they will be deeply hurt. And they have good reason to fear this, because look at how they were raised. They were raised as a prisoner of war. possibly worse than what a prisoner of war actually had to experience. And so these trauma survivors, some of them do find relationships. Unfortunately, for many, their concept of what a healthy person looks like is skewed, right? Because what they feel comfortable around is someone who abuses and uses. So they tend to gravitate toward persons that end up being predatory or narcissistic. And so they get abused and they get used. And they're in this vicious cycle because they become afraid to speak up for themselves because they're afraid of how their partner is going to respond. And then they don't speak up for themselves, and then they blow up with an act of anger, rage, or if they're the flight type, they escape. And it could have been just like a really slight thing, like some milk spilled and their partner said a swear word, and they're like, I'm out of here. And they grab their keys and they literally just hit the road. It could have been something so small, so slight, but it was so intense of a feeling for that survivor because they're used to having to absolutely guard and protect themselves from any anger, any contempt, because that could mean they're about to be obliterated. At least that's how it was in their household growing up. It was comply or die. And so that's the way they behave in their relationship sometimes. And that's why they don't want to be in a relationship sometimes, because who wants to be in a relationship where you have to comply or die? It's overwhelming. So some trauma survivors do find healthy persons, but even when they find a healthy person, if they haven't healed themselves, then they're still reflecting the unhealthy viewpoint on that person. So that person moves in their seat wrong or gets a little bit upset, and they have all of that fear coming back. They're still having the emotional flashbacks. They may begin to actually devalue the person so that they would have an excuse to detach from this wonderful person, because after all, they don't want to lose the person. And since they don't want to lose the person, they figure, well, let me go ahead and just sabotage this relationship now so I don't have to go through the pain of eventually losing the best thing that ever happened to me. And so they sabotage their own relationships. And that's going to cause a great deal of heartache and pain for the other person. But remember, a trauma survivor can't handle the fact that they're hurting someone else, and that alone makes them want to run the other direction. So needless to say, relationships can be very difficult for someone who comes from a background of complex trauma. So is there hope? How can a survivor begin to find people that are safe to be friends with? How can a survivor begin to find people that are safe to trust? What should they look for? It seems like there's so many red flags. And when we meet a person, it's like we're overwhelmed by all of their good qualities, but how do we know what the bad qualities are? Like, is there some kind of like code that we can use, some simple method we can use to differentiate the good from the bad, the safe from the unsafe persons? Well, it's important, first of all, that we don't view people in extremes as someone who's being all good, virtuous, and all bad, evil. Everyone exists somewhere on a line of continuum. So you have to just discern, is this person healthy for me, or is this person toxic for me? And that's how you have to differentiate between persons. But still, one would want to know, how can I determine if someone's healthy or unhealthy? And how do I show up to the relationship so that I'm liked, so that I'm healthy? And so for this, you can show up as your epic self. You can use the acronym EPIC, EPIC. Those four letters represent the four quadrants of the higher self. Let's discuss those four letters and what they stand for. Your E stands for ethical. Your P stands for powerful. Your I stands for intelligent. And your C stands for compassionate. Now, first of all, you have to look at these things in terms of yourself and how you're showing up for relationships. Being the epic self is being the best self. It's being the higher self. It's existing with these higher qualities so that you are actualized and healed, so that you are no longer in the fight, flight, constant state of fear, anxiety, panic, dysregulated emotions, anger, and acting in a way that is unhealthy and toxic for others. And so, in order to be the epic self, you have to make sure every decision you make and the way you act is governed by these four qualities. You have to be ethical, powerful, intelligent, and compassionate in everything you do. You are also looking for these qualities in others. So let's talk about what these qualities mean. This first one, ethical. In order to be the higher self, you must be a person of integrity, of high moral standards. You need ethics, right? When you go through life, if you're going through without a moral code, just doing whatever seems to be popular to everyone else, you can't really display character, can you? Because now you're just that chameleon who's code switching all the time to blend in with everyone. You need ethics. You need your own standards of morals. Being an ethical person is having an appreciation for justice. Being an ethical person is doing what's right, what's righteous, even at expense to yourself. So it's like you see someone who drops their wallet and their wallet has money in it, and you go and you pick up the wallet, and instead of putting it in your pocket and walking away, that would be unethical, right? Instead of doing that, you say, hey, sir, you dropped your wallet, and you give it to the person who dropped it. That's ethics. The ability to discern morally what the higher response would be, even if it's at detriment to the self. It's doing, or seemingly not to the benefit of the self, it's doing what's really best in an overall universal sense. Humans cannot properly interact with one another if they don't have morals, if they don't have ethics. Contrary to the belief of animalists and people who believe that humans are just merely animals. Well, the problem there is, and yes, we are mammals, but please understand, if we acted on an animalistic level, then that means we can just go kill anyone at any time. That's what animals do, just to assert their dominance. They'll just go kill somebody. You know what I'm saying? You have to have ethics and morals that elevates us above the animals. And in every society, they've had laws. Laws are a moral code for the entire nation or city. It's a universal moral code. It's saying, here's our ethics, and we all adhere to this. And they've all had basic ethics against murder and stealing. Every society through history has had a moral code. So you need to have your moral code. You have to define your ethics. Likewise, when trying to find someone as a friend, if they are missing one of these qualities, that's probably a sign that you should keep them just as an associate, if even that. And so if they're missing ethics, if they're immoral, they have no sense of morality, they don't care about justice or kindness to their fellow man, that would be someone you could not be friends with. That is an unhealthy, potentially unhealthy friend. You're going to get hurt sooner or later because they have no moral code. They don't care about you or anyone. You need people who have a moral code that they live by, who have high standards, who are ethical. When we talk about this next one, powerful. The concept of being powerful is being in touch with your personal power. That is your ability, your capability, your capacity, your potential for change, your ability to enact change, to create change, your ability to create in general. That's power. All humans have power. We have the power of the tongue, the ability to speak. We have the power of our perception, how we look at things. We have the power of our hands to build, the power of our creativity to create, to design. We can write, right? And you can write anything from a story to nonfiction to instructions to poetry. This is power. Our ability to influence others, it's power. Every human has power. Now, this concept is very uncomfortable for especially trauma survivors. Most trauma survivors live in a state of weakness or victim mentality. Because of the way they were raised as a prisoner of war, they were taught to be powerless. They were taught to not identify the power in themselves. They were taught to see themselves as less than, as less powerful than. All of their core trauma is at the hands of someone more powerful than them. That was their parents. The power differential was uneven, and so they were constantly at a disadvantage. They were constantly under pressure to capitulate, to comply, or die. And so they view power as a negative thing. Sometimes they associate it with negativity because they associate it with those who abused power over them. And we see so many examples today of people who abuse their power in society. But the reality is most all people who have power have accidentally at some point misused their power. That is actually the definition of a transgression. It is to you doing something wrong. That means you did something. That means you were powerful and you misused your power. You did something you shouldn't have done. So when you called someone a name or you said something hurtful to them, that was a misuse of your power, perhaps. So it's important to understand what power is and that everyone has power. So the quality of being a powerful person is how do you utilize your power? It's using your power in a way that's beneficial for others, but it's also being in touch with your power so that you can stand up for yourself, so that you can set boundaries for yourself. But more than that, you can accomplish things in life. You're working on your legacy. You are a person who is creating something. Every person needs to be creating something because we have creative power. Understanding this about yourself, you have to analyze, do I show up as a powerful person? It's not a bad thing. It's not a negative trait. It's actually very attractive when you meet a person who is powerful. They can conduct themselves with humility. They can be very kind, but you notice they're powerful. Their potential is evident. Show up as a powerful person. An unhealthy, sometimes trauma survivors, I have a victim mentality, which is like, it never works out for me. Something always goes wrong. I can't. I'm not able to. They're always in a state of weakness. Sometimes they're looking for a rescuer. I can't. I don't know. I can't. I don't know how. I don't know how. I don't know what. It's always, I can't. A powerful person is, how can we? Maybe we can. Well, I can do this. Well, I can do that. A powerful person is helpful. A weak person is scared. Even if they do something to help, it's just out of fear. So you want to show up in power, being motivated by a vision of dreams and love, what you can do for other people. So you also want to look for persons that utilize their power in a responsible manner, but they're not just in victim mentality. They're not always, I can't, I don't have, I'm not able to. They're in touch with their capabilities. They're in touch with what they can do, with what they bring to the table. These are the types of people that you want to establish a relationship with, a person who uses their power in a responsible way. Because when we don't even acknowledge that we have power, we become irresponsible with our power. A really common thing, trauma survivors will ghost someone. That's a form of emotional abuse. If you're in a relationship with someone and you're relying on each other for emotional support, and then you just coldly cut off communication, that's a misuse of power. You have emotionally abused that person. The trauma survivors they're trying to defend themselves, but they'll start calling other people names. This is a misuse of your power. So we have to get in touch with that we are powerful. It's a sobering concept. And when you realize you can't detach from your power, you are powerful. Now you step into your power, and now you can reach a sense of self-actualization. And you want to find friends who are doing the same thing. This next quality, intelligence, the definition of intelligence is the ability to apply knowledge. This is not the same as book smarts. The ability to apply knowledge. Coincidentally, that's virtually the same definition as wisdom. So when we're talking about intelligence here, we're talking about wisdom, the ability to take what one knows and utilize it to make decisions. A foolish person says, I know I shouldn't ABC, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's foolishness. Wisdom is saying, I know I shouldn't ABC, so I won't. That's wisdom. That's intelligence. It's applying your knowledge. You know what to do, so you do what you know you should, and you don't do what you know you shouldn't. This is a terrible quality in a friend. Someone who's not intelligent, who is not wise, a person who is foolish. That means they're always getting themselves into trouble. They're in over their head all the time. They're always going to have some situation because they are foolish in their dealings. You get that phone call and it's like, hey, hello, what? Yeah, what's the problem? Where are you right now? How did you get there? Why? How did this happen? I thought you said you were going to stay single for a while. You know, it's like they're in some weird situation. They said they were going to handle it. They said they were going to take care of their life. They're going to start doing what was right, but they don't live up to that. That is not intelligence. That's foolishness. Wisdom is doing what you know to be correct. All of you have a potential for wisdom. All people have a potential for wisdom. You already know what is wise instinctually. Like, should you eat healthy food or should you eat unhealthy food? What's more wise? You know the answer to that. Should you exercise on a regular basis or not? Should you meditate on a regular basis or not? You know how to be wise, but if you are wise, if you are intelligent, you live by what you know. You apply it. That's intelligence. That's the type of people you want. It's not about book smarts. I had an associate that was honestly a bit irritating, but what he would do that was so irritating all the time is he would be spouting off facts, but there was never any wisdom to it. He just, if we pass by a bush, he's telling me what kind of bush it is. We pass by a bug, he's telling me the bug. He's asking me if I know about honeybees and all these weird questions at random times. It's like, it gets to be annoying. Like, I appreciate that you have book smarts, but that's not an attractive quality, just spouting facts like an encyclopedia at me that I'm not asking questions about. Intelligence, wisdom is knowledge applied. So it's when you ask the question, then you give the proper answer, the proper response to that question. That's a friend that you can be attracted to, someone who uses wisdom in their life and someone who doesn't try to hold up degrees or titles or book smarts. That's not wisdom. A man can have the masters and the doctorates and all the highest degrees and come out of his schooling and say, now I wonder what I can do to make money. Now that I've spent all that time and all that money and all that education. Meanwhile, you have a man who didn't even graduate high school, but he has his own mechanic shop that he's been running since he's been in mechanics since he's been 16. So by the time his comrade gets out of earning all of these degrees, his comrade will never catch up to where the mechanic is in his financial life, because the mechanic applied the knowledge he had. I know mechanics. Here's how I can use it to benefit myself and my community. This guy's like, I got my degrees, but I don't know how to use them. It's not wrong to have the degrees. That's not the problem. The problem is you must also have wisdom to apply your knowledge. So obtain the knowledge, but don't rely just simply on book smarts. We need to have intelligence to know how to use what it is that we've learned. Trauma survivors need to make their decisions in intelligence, understanding how to put the pieces together and do what they know instinctually is right, instead of going with what is their emotional response. This last one, compassion. To show up as the epic self, you have to be compassionate. I wish I knew this information before I met my before I met my wife. It sounds like a dig, and I'm sure if she ever saw this, she would think I was digging at her. But she seemed to be ethical because she attended church and all that, and she was a powerful person, and she was very intelligent. I was attracted to that. She was not compassionate. And now I realize that, because most narcissists will be lacking in this area. When it comes to compassion, caring, empathy, genuine concern for another person's feelings, love, not just romantic love. We're talking about that deep principled love, that general love of neighbor, love of mankind love. That's the type of compassion we should have. And we should make our decisions in compassion. This is probably the most important quality on the list. Because if we have all those other things, but we don't have compassion, then you're like the narcissist that created you. You could just become like a bully. We don't want to be without compassion. That in itself is a mental illness. We need compassion for others. We need to care. We need to love. Don't hate your empathy. Some survivors are so tired of being empathetic. Don't hate your empathy. Appreciate your empathy. Compassion is a part of what it takes to be a whole and complete person. Compassion is a part of what elevates us above the animals. Compassion is a part of how we can achieve all of the best parts of ourselves, the highest qualities, to show love, to show empathy, to show compassion. We want that to guide our every decision. Compassion is paramount. It is so important. So, are you a compassionate person? Do you care about others? Are you concerned with really not just how they feel about you because you're afraid of what they think of you? You really care about their well-being. That's compassion. It's not just a self-protective, oh, I don't want anyone to be mad at me. Compassion is, I care about your well-being. Are you a compassionate person? Well, to show up as the epic self, you must have all four of those qualities. You must be ethical, powerful, intelligent, compassionate. And that's what you look for in a friend. Someone who's compassionate listens. They don't just talk about themselves. Someone who's compassionate shows empathy for other people. They care for animals. Someone who's compassionate is kind to children. Someone who's compassionate shows love for people in their life. And you can see how they treat other people. Then you know how they're eventually going to treat you when they become familiar. And so use these four traits and look for an epic friend. And then when you find a person who is epic, you can build a bond of trust and unity. And eventually, out of that friend group, find yourself someone who can be a mate. If someone is epic, then they're a safe person. And the same applies to us. We want to make the effort to show up as an epic person.